The chains bit into Elena's wrists as two guards dragged her across the frozen courtyard, and she already knew this was not a punishment. It was a sale. Snow fell in thin sheets over the Black Moon fortress, and torches burned along the stone walls even though it was barely past noon. Elena kept her eyes forward, refusing to let the watching wolves see her shake. She had lived in this pack for 19 years. She had healed their wounded, fed their children, and stood quietly at the edge of every gathering, waiting for a place that never came. Now she understood there had never been a place for her at all. Alpha King Damien stood at the top of the stone steps, wrapped in a dark fur cloak, his expression as flat and unreadable as the winter sky behind him. Beside him stood Seraphina, his true mate, her golden hair catching the weak sunlight, her lips curved in the faint satisfaction of a woman who had already won everything she wanted. Elena stopped in front of the steps because the guards forced her to stop. "You understand why this is happening," Damien said. It was not a question. "You are giving me away," Elena said. Her voice did not break, though her chest felt hollow. "I am securing peace," Damien corrected. "Nightshade Pack has threatened war for 3 seasons. Alpha Cain wants a bride from Black Moon as proof of goodwill. You are unclaimed. You have no mate, no title, no family who will grieve the loss. It is the simplest solution." Elena stared at him, searching for some trace of the boy who had once carried her on his shoulders through the training fields, before he became a king who measured people by their usefulness. She found nothing. "I saved your life once," she said quietly. "Do you remember that?" Something flickered across Damien's face, gone before it could become guilt. "That is precisely why I chose you," he said. "I know you will survive this." Behind him, Seraphina let out a soft, satisfied breath, as though a splinter had finally been removed from her side. The guards pulled Elena forward again, toward a black carriage waiting at the edge of the courtyard, its wheels already hitched to 4 restless horses. She did not look back at the fortress that had never been her home. She looked instead at the dark road ahead, disappearing into the pine forest that marked the border between Black Moon land and enemy territory. As the carriage doors closed and the horses lurched forward, Elena pressed her palm against the cold window and watched the only world she had ever known shrink into the distance. She did not cry. She had promised herself long ago that Damien would never see her cry again, and she intended to keep that promise even now, even from miles away, even though he would never know it. The journey to Nightshade Land took most of the day. The forest grew thicker and darker with every mile, the trees bending close together like sentries guarding a secret. Elena watched the guards riding beside the carriage, Black Moon wolves sent to deliver her safely and then return home without her. None of them spoke to her. None of them met her eyes. She had become cargo, not a person, and cargo did not need conversation. By the time the carriage slowed, the sky had turned a deep, bruised purple, and the outline of a massive stone castle rose out of the mist ahead, its towers taller and darker than anything Black Moon had ever built. Elena's stomach tightened. Stories about Nightshade Pack had circulated through Black Moon for years, tales of a ruthless alpha who crushed his enemies without mercy and ruled through fear alone. She had grown up believing those stories the way she believed the sun would rise. The carriage stopped at an iron gate. Torches lined the path beyond it, casting long shadows across a courtyard filled with silent wolves who turned to watch the arrival. Elena's guards helped her down, their grips firm but not unkind, and for a strange moment she almost wished they would simply leave her here and disappear, so she would not have to watch Black Moon wolves report back to Damien that the exchange had been completed. A tall figure stepped out from the castle doors, and the courtyard fell into a deeper silence. He was younger than Elena expected, with sharp features, dark hair, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore no crown, no ceremonial cloak, nothing to announce his rank, except the way every wolf around him instinctively lowered their gaze. Elena did not lower hers. She had learned humility from a king who did not deserve it, and she was not ready to offer the same to a stranger. "You must be Elena," the man said. His voice was calm, low, and carried easily across the courtyard. "I am Cain." "Alpha Cain," Elena said, forcing steadiness into her tone. "I was told you requested a bride from Black Moon." Something like amusement crossed his face, though it did not reach his eyes. "I requested a hostage of goodwill," he said. Damien decided to call it a bride. The difference matters less to me than it might to you. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, though she could not tell if it was anger or humiliation. Then what happens to me now? Kane studied her for a long moment, as though weighing something she could not see. For now, you rest, he said. Tomorrow, we will discuss the rest. He turned and walked back toward the castle, without waiting for her response, and one of his guards, a broad-shouldered woman named Priya, stepped forward to lead Elena inside. The castle halls were colder than Elena expected, lit by torches instead of the warm hearths Blackmoon favored. But there was an order to everything, a discipline that felt different from the chaos she had imagined. Priya led her up a narrow staircase to a modest room, with a single window overlooking the dark forest. You will stay here, Priya said. Food will be brought soon. Do not wander the halls at night. Alpha Kane does not tolerate wandering. Am I a prisoner? Elena asked. Priya paused at the door, her expression unreadable. You are a guest, for now, she said. What you become depends on you. Then she left, closing the door behind her, and Elena was alone, in a strange castle, in enemy land, with no idea what tomorrow would bring. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and finally allowed herself one slow breath, releasing the tension she had carried since the moment Damien spoke the word trade. She had spent her whole life trying to earn a place in a pack that never wanted her. Perhaps here, among strangers who owed her nothing, she would finally learn what it meant to belong to herself instead. Outside her window, the moon rose full and bright over the dark pines, and somewhere deep in her chest, though she could not explain why, Elena felt something stir that had never stirred before, a quiet pull toward the land beneath her, as though the earth itself had been waiting for her arrival. She did not know yet what that feeling meant. She only knew that for the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone. Sleep came slowly, filled with fragmented dreams of silver light and ancient voices she could not understand. When morning came, sharp and cold through the thin curtains, Elena woke with her heart pounding, and a strange warmth pulsing faintly beneath the skin of her wrist, gone before she could look closely enough to be sure it had been there at all. She dressed in the plain clothes left folded at the end of her bed, and waited, unsure what the day would demand of her, unsure whether Nightshade Pack would treat her as an enemy, a hostage, or something else entirely. Whatever answer waited beyond that door, she resolved to face it with the same quiet strength that had carried her through 19 years, in a pack that never once called her one of their own. When Priya returned to collect her for breakfast, Elena rose without hesitation and followed her into the unknown halls of Nightshade Castle, determined that whatever Kane intended for her, she would not enter it as a broken, discarded bride. She would enter it as a woman still deciding who she wanted to become. The dining hall was smaller than Elena expected, warmed by a wide stone hearth, with a long table set for only a handful of people, rather than the crowded feasts Blackmoon held each morning. Kane sat at the head of the table, a plate of food untouched in front of him, his attention fixed on a folded letter he held between two fingers. He looked up when Elena entered, and for a brief moment, something unreadable passed behind his eyes, before his expression settled back into calm indifference. Sit, he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Elena sat, aware of Priya standing near the door, and two other wolves seated further down the table, watching her with quiet curiosity rather than hostility. It was not what she expected from the pack Blackmoon had painted as savage and merciless. You did not sleep well, Kane observed, setting the letter aside. How would you know that? Elena asked. Your eyes, he said simply, and the way you are gripping your fork like a weapon. Elena forced her fingers to relax. Forgive me, I am not accustomed to enemy territory. This is not enemy territory, Kane said. Not anymore. As of yesterday, Blackmoon and Nightshade share a truce. You are the proof of it. I am proof of nothing, Elena said, sharper than she intended. I am a woman, Damien decided he no longer needed. Kane's gaze sharpened slightly, studying her with new interest. You speak plainly for someone who was traded like livestock. Would you prefer I weep instead? A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. No, he said, I would not. Breakfast continued in careful, measured conversation, Kane asking small questions about her life in Blackmoon, Elena answering only what she felt safe revealing. She learned little about him in return, only that he ruled Nightshade alone, without a mate, and that his pack respected him not out of fear, as the stories claimed, but out of something closer to loyalty. After breakfast, Cain led her through the castle himself, something Elena had not expected from an Alpha King. He showed her the training grounds, the healing quarters, the library filled with old texts bound in cracked leather. Wolves nodded to him as he passed, calling him by name rather than title, a familiarity that would have been unthinkable in Damien's court. "You are not what I expected," Elena admitted, as they walked along the castle's outer wall, overlooking a valley thick with pine forest. "Neither are you," Cain said. "Damien described you as quiet and obedient. I assumed I was receiving a girl who would flinch at every order." "And now?" Cain glanced at her, his gray eyes steady. "Now I think Damien understood very little about the woman he traded away." Elena said nothing, but something in her chest loosened slightly, a tension she had carried since childhood beginning, for the first time, to ease. They stopped near the edge of the wall, where the wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow. Cain's expression grew serious. "I did not request a bride for sentiment," he said. "Nightshade needed proof that Black Moon would honor peace. You are that proof, but I will not treat you as property. You will have a place here, a purpose, if you want one. And if I don't want one, then you will still have safety," Cain said. "That is not conditional." Elena studied him carefully, searching for the trick, the hidden cruelty Black Moon had warned her about. She found none, only a man burdened by responsibility, standing at the edge of his own kingdom, offering her something Damien never had, a choice. For the first time since the trade, Elena allowed herself to hope that Nightshade might become something other than a prison. As the wind swept over the valley below, carrying the scent of a forest that did not yet feel like home, but no longer felt entirely foreign either, Elena made a quiet promise to herself. She would not spend her life in this new kingdom the way she had spent it in the old one, invisible and waiting. Whatever power or purpose waited for her here, she intended to claim it fully, on her own terms, starting now. That evening, as the castle settled into quiet and moonlight spilled across the stone floors, Elena sat by her window and watched the forest below, the same strange warmth from the night before, returning briefly to her wrist, a whisper of something ancient stirring beneath her skin. She did not understand it yet, but she suspected, deep down, that her life was no longer following the path Damien had chosen for her. It was following a path of her own. 3 weeks passed inside the walls of Nightshade Castle, and with each day, Elena felt the sharp edges of fear soften into something closer to routine. She woke early, walked the eastern gardens before breakfast, and spent her afternoons in the small library, reading old records of pack law that no one at Black Moon had ever allowed her to touch. No one here called her a hostage. No one called her a bride either. She existed, for the moment, in a quiet space between the two, and strangely, that space felt safer than anywhere she had lived before. Cain rarely joined her during the day, occupied with council meetings and border reports, but he found her most evenings, walking the same stretch of the outer wall where they had first spoken honestly to each other. Their conversations remained careful, neither fully trusting the other, yet each night the distance between them shrank by a small, deliberate degree. "You have not asked to leave," Cain said one evening, watching the sun sink behind the tree line. "Would you let me, if I asked?" Elena said. "I told you this was not a prison." "You told me many things," Elena said. "I am still deciding which ones to believe." Cain's mouth curved into the faintest smile, the kind Elena had come to recognize as genuine, rather than performed for the benefit of watching guards. "Fair enough," he said. It was during one such evening, as clouds thickened over the valley, and the wind carried an early winter chill, that Elena first noticed the guards near the training yard, whispering as she passed. She caught only fragments, words like unnatural, and drawn to her, spoken by wolves, who quickly fell silent when they noticed her attention. She mentioned nothing to Cain that night, unwilling to draw more attention to something she did not yet understand herself. But the whispers followed her over the coming days, growing slightly louder each time she crossed paths with the pack's warriors. Dogs that had once ignored her now paused mid-stride when she walked near the kennels. Young pups who wandered the courtyard gravitated toward her without explanation, tugging at her sleeve, staring up at her with wide, curious eyes. Elena told herself it meant nothing. She had grown used to being invisible in Black Moon, and she did not know what to make of sudden, unearned attention here. Then came the full moon. Nightshade pack gathered in the wide courtyard beneath the castle walls to shift together, an old tradition Elena had heard about but never witnessed firsthand, since Black Moon abandoned communal shifting years earlier under Damien's rule. Cain invited her to observe from the balcony above, and though she hesitated, curiosity won out over caution. The moment the moon cleared the tree line, pale and enormous over the valley, something inside Elena's chest tightened sharply, as though an invisible hand had reached into her ribs. She gripped the balcony railing, breath-catching, and looked down to see her own wrist glowing faintly beneath her sleeve, a pattern of intricate silver lines spreading briefly across her skin, before fading as quickly as it appeared. Below, in the courtyard, the shifting wolves froze mid-motion. One by one, without any visible command, they turned toward the balcony and lowered their heads, an unmistakable gesture of submission Elena had only ever seen directed toward Cain himself. Cain, standing beside her, went very still. "What was that?" Elena whispered, staring at her wrist, now bare and unmarked once more. "I do not know," Cain said, though his voice carried a tension Elena had not heard from him before. "But I intend to find out." He did not send her away that night, nor did he treat her differently in front of his pack, though Elena noticed the careful way he positioned himself near her for the rest of the evening, as though guarding a secret rather than a hostage. When the courtyard finally emptied and the wolves returned to their quarters, Cain led her quietly to a private study she had never seen before, tucked behind a locked door on the castle's upper floor. Inside, shelves lined every wall, filled with old scrolls and worn leather books, far older than anything in the main library. Cain moved directly to a cabinet near the back of the room and retrieved a small wooden box, setting it carefully on the desk between them. "My grandmother kept records most packs no longer remember," he said, opening the box to reveal a stack of aged parchment. Stories considered myth by everyone outside a handful of old bloodlines. "What kind of stories?" Elena asked. Cain hesitated, studying her carefully before answering. "Stories about a bloodline that existed before Alpha Kings ruled the packs," he said. "A line of women born with authority over every wolf, regardless of pack or territory. They were called Moon-Blessed Queens." Elena felt a strange chill settle over her skin. "That sounds like a fairy tale." "It did, to me as well," Cain said, "until tonight." He slid one of the parchments toward her, revealing a faded illustration of intricate silver markings, remarkably similar to the pattern Elena had glimpsed on her wrist moments before. Her breath caught in her throat. "The bloodline was believed extinct," Cain continued. "Hunted, according to these records, by Alpha Kings, who feared losing power to a ruler they could not control." "You think I am connected to this?" Elena said slowly. "I think," Cain said, choosing his words with obvious care, "that something in you commanded my entire pack to kneel tonight, without a single word spoken. I do not believe in coincidences that large." Elena stared down at her wrist, unmarked now, ordinary in every visible way, and yet she could not deny the warmth she had felt building beneath her skin for weeks, nor the strange magnetic pull she had noticed in every wolf who crossed her path since arriving at Nightshade. "If this is true," she said quietly, "why would no one at Black Moon ever tell me?" Cain's expression darkened slightly. "If your bloodline was hidden deliberately," he said, "then someone at Black Moon has known the truth about you far longer than you have." The weight of his words settled heavily over the room, and Elena found herself gripping the edge of the desk, steadying herself against a truth she was not yet ready to accept. She had spent her entire life believing herself unwanted, discarded, insignificant enough to be traded away without hesitation. If Cain was right, someone had built that entire narrative around her on purpose, burying a truth dangerous enough to threaten the very throne that raised her. "What do we do now?" she asked. Cain closed the wooden box carefully, his gaze steady on hers. "For now, we keep this between us," he said, "until we understand exactly what you are, and exactly who wanted you hidden. It is safer that Nightshade sees you only as Damien's exiled bride, nothing more." Elena nodded slowly, though her mind raced far ahead of the quiet study around her, circling back again and again to the same unsettling question. If she truly carried the blood of a forgotten line of queens, powerful enough to command obedience without a single word, then somewhere in her past, someone had made a very deliberate choice to erase that truth completely. And she intended to find out exactly who, and exactly why. As they left the study that night, walking side by side down the quiet castle corridor, Elena felt Kane's presence beside her differently than she had before. No longer simply an unfamiliar alpha holding her fate in his hands, but a man who had just chosen, without hesitation, to protect a secret capable of reshaping the entire balance of power between two kingdoms. Whatever waited for her beyond these walls, she understood now that her life would never again resemble the quiet, invisible existence she had known in Black Moon. Something ancient had begun to wake inside her, and there would be no going back to the woman she used to be. The following weeks moved differently than the ones before them. Elena still walked the eastern gardens each morning, and read quietly in the library each afternoon. But now, every ordinary moment felt shadowed by the secret she and Kane shared, a truth too dangerous to speak aloud, and too significant to ignore. Kane arranged for a woman named Ines, an elder healer, who had served 3 generations of Nightshade leadership, to work with Elena privately, away from the eyes of the rest of the pack. Ines had spent decades studying old bloodlines and forgotten pack law, and though she asked no questions about why the Alpha King wanted her tutoring a Black Moon exile in secret, her sharp eyes suggested she understood more than she let on. "Sit," Ines said during their first session, gesturing to a cushion on the floor of a small stone chamber beneath the castle, far from prying ears. "Give me your wrist." Elena obeyed, extending her arm. Ines studied the bare skin carefully, tracing invisible lines with a fingertip, murmuring something under her breath that Elena did not understand. "The mark only surfaces under strong emotion or moonlight," Ines said finally. "That is common among old bloodlines whose power has gone dormant for generations. Your body remembers something your mind has never been taught." "How do I learn to control it?" Elena asked. "Slowly," Ines said, "and carefully. Power like this does not respond well to fear or force. It responds to calm, to certainty, to the parts of yourself you have not yet allowed to exist freely." She studied Elena for a long moment. "You have spent your life making yourself small, haven't you?" Elena said nothing, but the truth of the question settled uncomfortably in her chest. "That ends now," Ines said simply. "If you are who Alpha Kane believes you to be, the world will not survive you continuing to shrink yourself for other people's comfort." Their sessions became a quiet ritual over the following weeks. Ines taught her to breathe through the strange warmth that rose in her chest during moments of stress, to recognize the subtle shift in the air whenever her presence began to influence nearby wolves. Slowly, Elena learned to notice the mark rising faintly beneath her skin, before it became visible, learned to steady it, rather than let it surface uncontrolled. Outside their sessions, Elena's days remained carefully ordinary, at least on the surface. She continued walking the gardens, continued sharing quiet dinners with Kane, continued pretending, in front of the wider pack, to be nothing more than an exiled bride adjusting to a strange new home. But something had shifted between her and Kane that neither of them acknowledged directly. He sought her out more often now, not merely out of political obligation, but because their conversations had become something he seemed genuinely to want. Elena noticed the way his guarded expression softened slightly whenever she challenged him, the way he listened carefully to her opinions on pack matters she technically had no authority to discuss. One evening, walking together along the same stretch of wall that had become theirs, without either of them deciding it, Kane turned to her with unusual hesitation. "Damien sent a message today," he said. Elena's chest tightened instinctively. "What does he want?" "An update on your well-being," Kane said, his tone carefully neutral. "He claims concern." "He has no right to concern," Elena said sharply, surprising herself with the force of her own voice. "I told him as much," Kane said, though not in those words. Elena studied his face, searching for the reason behind the careful way he was watching her. "You are worried he suspects something." "I am worried," Kane said slowly, "that whoever hid your bloodline from you may still be watching closely enough to notice if the truth begins slipping loose. If Damien learns what you are, Before we understand the full scope of it ourselves, he may try to reclaim you. He traded me away without hesitation, Elena said. Why would he want me back? Kane's gray eyes held hers steadily. Because kings who discover they discarded something powerful rarely feel remorse over the loss, he said. They feel the need to correct their mistake, by any means necessary. The warning settled heavily over Elena, and though she wanted to dismiss it, some instinct deep inside her recognized the truth in his words immediately. That night, unable to sleep, Elena found herself wandering the quiet halls of the castle long after most of Nightshade had gone to rest. She did not intend to go far, only to walk off the restless energy coiled tightly in her chest, but her feet carried her, almost without her permission, toward the castle's lower levels, past storage chambers and old training rooms rarely used. She stopped outside a door she had never noticed before, drawn toward it by something she could not explain, the same faint warmth stirring beneath her skin that had marked every strange occurrence since her arrival. The door was unlocked. Inside, she found a small chamber lined with old portraits, faces of women she did not recognize, painted in styles far older than anything else in the castle. At the center of the far wall hung a portrait larger than the rest, depicting a woman with pale hair and calm, commanding eyes, wearing a crown unlike any Elena had ever seen, silver and delicate, shaped like intertwined crescent moons. Beneath the portrait, a small brass plaque read a single name, Queen Leora, last of the moon blessed. Elena's breath caught sharply in her throat. The resemblance between herself and the painted woman was unmistakable, not identical, but close enough to send a shiver down her spine. I wondered how long it would take you to find this room. Elena turned quickly to find Kane standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the dim candlelight. Who was she? Elena asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer. The last confirmed moon-blessed queen, according to Nightshade records, Kane said, stepping further into the room. She ruled centuries ago, before the Alpha Kings consolidated power and rewrote history to remove any trace of a ruling line above their own. My family kept this room hidden for generations, refusing to let her memory disappear entirely. Elena stared at the portrait again, at the calm authority in Queen Leora's painted eyes, so unlike the uncertain woman Elena had always believed herself to be. You think I am descended from her? I think, Kane said carefully, that the evidence is becoming difficult to deny. Elena felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her chest, an inheritance she had never asked for and barely understood, tied to a bloodline powerful enough to have once ruled every pack in the region, powerful enough that Alpha Kings had apparently gone to great lengths to erase it from history entirely. If this is true, she said slowly, then Damien did not simply trade away an unwanted woman. He traded away someone with a legitimate claim to authority over his own throne. Yes, Kane said quietly, and if he ever learns that, Elena, I do not believe he will let you go a second time without a fight. The two of them stood together in the dim, quiet chamber, surrounded by the painted faces of forgotten queens, and Elena understood, with sudden and undeniable clarity, that the life she had once resigned herself to, small, invisible, and unwanted, no longer existed. Whatever came next, whatever war of blood and power waited on the horizon, she would face it, not as a discarded bride, but as the last living heir of a line the world had tried very hard to forget. Kane stepped closer, his voice low and steady. Whatever you decide to do with this truth, he said, know that you do not have to decide it alone. Elena looked up at him, searching his face for any trace of the calculation Damien had always shown her, and finding instead something far more honest. Why does that matter to you? She asked quietly. I am not your bride. I am not your Luna. By every rule your pack follows, I am simply a hostage kept for peace. Perhaps, Kane said, holding her gaze without hesitation, but some truths change the moment you are willing to see them clearly. Neither of them moved to close the remaining distance between them, though the air in the small chamber had grown charged with something neither was ready to name. Elena turned back toward the portrait of Queen Leora, her ancestor, her blood, her legacy, and made a silent vow beneath the painted gaze of a woman who had ruled long before either Black Moon or Nightshade existed. She would not let history erase her twice. News of Elena's disappearance from Black Moon's official records reached Damien sooner than he expected, delivered not by a spy but by an anonymous letter slipped beneath his chamber door one gray morning. The letter contained a single line, written in unfamiliar handwriting. "The woman you discarded is not what you believed her to be." Damien read it 3 times before setting it aside, telling himself it meant nothing, the ramblings of some disgruntled wolf hoping to unsettle him. Yet the words lodged themselves stubbornly in his mind over the following days, refusing to be dismissed as easily as he wanted. He had not thought much about Elena since the trade. She had existed at the edges of his court for years, quiet and useful, easy to overlook once Serafina claimed the position at his side that Elena had never truly held to begin with. Trading her to Nightshade had felt, at the time, like solving 2 problems with a single decision, securing peace while removing a presence Serafina had never fully tolerated. But the letter unsettled something in him, a memory buried beneath years of careful indifference. He remembered, faintly, whispers from his own mother decades earlier, quiet warnings about a bloodline the old Alpha Kings feared enough to hunt to extinction. He remembered dismissing those warnings as superstition, the same way he now wanted to dismiss this letter. He could not quite manage it. Late that night, unable to shake his unease, Damien descended into the fortress archives, a room he rarely visited, filled with records older than his own reign. He searched through faded ledgers and crumbling family trees for hours, until finally, buried in a box of unclaimed infant records from nearly 2 decades earlier, he found a name that made his blood run cold. Elena's birth record did not match the family she had been raised by. The names of her true parents had been struck through entirely, replaced by a single word scrawled in the margin: relocated. Beneath it, in smaller handwriting, someone had added a warning that chilled him further still. Bloodline suspected moon-blessed. Concealment, ordered by council decree. Damien sat back slowly, the old ledger trembling slightly in his hands. He had not simply traded away an unwanted orphan. He had traded away a woman his own council had deliberately hidden for nearly 20 years, fearing exactly the kind of power capable of threatening every Alpha King's claim to the throne. And he had handed her, unknowingly, directly into the hands of his greatest rival. The realization settled over him with sickening clarity. If Elena truly carried moon-blessed blood, then Cain now possessed leverage capable of dismantling everything Damien had built. Worse, if Cain recognized her power before Damien corrected his mistake, Nightshade would gain not merely a bride, but a legitimate claim to rule above every Alpha King in the region, including his own. He could not allow that to happen. The following morning, Damien summoned his most trusted advisor, a sharp-eyed man named Ellison who had served the Black Moon Council for decades. He laid the ledger before him without explanation, watching Ellison's expression shift from confusion to alarm as he read the marginal notes. "This cannot be accurate," Ellison said carefully. "It is dated and signed by the previous council," Damien said. "There is no reasonable explanation for a forgery this precise." Ellison set the ledger down slowly. "If this is true, my king, you have made a very serious error." "I am aware," Damien said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Which is why I need this resolved quietly, before Nightshade fully understands what they now hold. What do you intend to do?" Damien's expression hardened into something colder, more calculating than the uncertain man who had read the anonymous letter days earlier. "I intend to correct my mistake," he said. "Elena belongs to Black Moon. Whatever bloodline runs through her veins, it belongs to this throne, not Cain's." Ellison hesitated. She was given freely, as part of a peace agreement, reclaiming her risks breaking the truce entirely. "The truce was built on a lie," Damien said. "I did not knowingly hand Nightshade a legitimate claim to authority over every pack in this region. I was deceived by my own council's silence." His jaw tightened. "I will find a way to bring her home, Ellison, one way or another." Meanwhile, in Black Moon's private chambers, Serafina listened from behind a half-open door, her expression darkening with every word she overheard. She had spent years ensuring Elena remained invisible, unclaimed, and easily discarded, carefully positioning herself as Damien's only true priority. The idea that Elena might return, not as a forgotten exile, but as a woman with legitimate authority over the throne Serafina intended to share, sent a cold, possessive fury through her chest. She would not allow that to happen either. Unbeknownst to Damien, Serafina had her own reasons for wanting Elena to remain far away from Blackmoon, reasons rooted not in political strategy, but in a jealousy she had nursed quietly for years, certain that some unspoken thread had always connected Damien to the woman he claimed meant nothing to him. As Damien began quietly assembling a plan to reclaim Elena from Nightshade territory, Serafina began forming a plan of her own, one designed not to help him succeed, but to ensure that whatever Elena had become, she never returned to Blackmoon to threaten the position Serafina had fought so carefully to secure. Neither of them realized, as their separate schemes took shape in the shadows of Blackmoon Fortress, that the woman they were both scheming against had already begun to understand the full weight of who she truly was, and had no intention of being reclaimed, discarded, or manipulated by either of them ever again. Far away, within the walls of Nightshade Castle, Elena remained unaware of the storm quietly gathering behind her, focused instead on the slow, careful process of understanding a power that had waited nearly 2 decades to fully awaken. She did not yet know that Damien had uncovered the truth of her bloodline, nor that Serafina now viewed her as a threat worth eliminating. She only knew that for the first time in her life, she was beginning to feel something dangerously close to strength. And soon, both Blackmoon and Nightshade would learn exactly how far that strength could reach. Ines began the next phase of Elena's training, with a warning rather than a lesson. "What you have learned so far is control," she said, guiding Elena into the same hidden stone chamber beneath the castle. "Today, we begin teaching you strength. The two are not the same, and mistaking one for the other will get you killed." Elena sat across from her, hands resting on her knees, trying to steady the nervous energy building in her chest. In the weeks since discovering Queen Leora's portrait, her connection to the dormant power inside her had grown sharper, easier to sense, though still frustratingly difficult to direct with any real precision. "Control keeps the power from overwhelming you," Ines continued. "Strength allows you to use it deliberately, on your own terms, rather than reacting instinctively to fear or danger. If Damien or anyone else ever comes for you, instinct alone will not be enough to protect yourself." "Do you believe he will come for me?" Elena asked quietly. Ines's expression grew serious. "Alpha Cain believes it. That is enough reason for both of us to prepare you properly." Their sessions grew longer and more demanding after that, moving from quiet meditation into physical exercises designed to test Elena's instincts under pressure. Ines taught her to recognize the subtle shift in her own body just before the silver markings began rising beneath her skin, teaching her to summon that same sensation deliberately, rather than waiting for extreme emotion to trigger it involuntarily. Progress came slowly, marked by small victories and frustrating setbacks. On one particularly difficult afternoon, Elena managed to hold the silver markings steady along her forearm for nearly a full minute, only to have them vanish completely the moment Ines asked her to extend the same command toward a nearby wolf standing guard outside the chamber. "You are still afraid of it," Ines observed, not unkindly. "Shouldn't I be?" Elena asked. "This kind of power got an entire bloodline hunted to near extinction." "Fear is reasonable," Ines said, "but fear that controls you, instead of guiding you, will only make you vulnerable, not safe." She studied Elena carefully. "You spent your whole life being told you were unworthy of attention, of authority, of anything beyond quiet obedience. That belief still lives inside you, even now, even here. Until you release it fully, this power will always feel like something separate from yourself, something dangerous, rather than something that belongs entirely to you." Elena absorbed the words slowly, recognizing painful truth within them. Even surrounded by evidence of her own bloodline, even watching wolves instinctively kneel in her presence, some deeply buried part of her still expected to be discarded, unwanted, unworthy of the legacy now unfolding before her. That evening, walking the familiar stretch of the castle wall beside Cain, Elena shared Ines's observation aloud for the first time. "She is right," Cain said, after a long moment of thought. "You still speak about yourself the way Damien's court taught you to, as though your worth depends entirely on someone else's approval." "That is easy for you to say," Elena replied. "You have never had to earn your place. You were born into it." "I was," Cain admitted, "but I have watched enough Alpha Kings inherit power, without ever truly earning it, to understand the difference clearly. Authority without genuine strength beneath it eventually collapses. What you carry, Elena, is not a title someone can strip away with a single decision. It is something no one gave you, and no one can take from you, no matter how many times they try. Elena studied him carefully in the fading light, aware of how far their relationship had shifted since her first frightened arrival at Nightshade's gates. You speak as though you already believe I will succeed. I do, Kane said simply. The quiet certainty in his voice settled something unsteady inside her chest, and for a brief moment, standing together at the edge of his kingdom, Elena allowed herself to imagine a version of her future that did not revolve entirely around survival, but around genuine purpose. Their growing closeness had not gone unnoticed within Nightshade's walls. Priya, who had watched over Elena since her first night in the castle, mentioned it carefully to Kane during a private meeting days later. The pack is beginning to talk, Priya said. Not with suspicion, with curiosity. They see the way you look at her, Alpha Kane. Kane's jaw tightened slightly. It changes nothing regarding her safety or her training. I did not suggest it should, Priya said. Only that you should be aware of how visible it has become, especially with Black Moon spies still occasionally slipping through our borders. She hesitated before adding, if Damien learns of any personal connection between you and Elena, beyond simple political obligation, it may only strengthen his resolve to reclaim her. Kane absorbed the warning silently, aware of its truth, even as something stubborn within him resisted the idea of distancing himself from Elena, for the sake of caution alone. He had spent years ruling Nightshade, with careful, deliberate detachment, protecting his pack through strategy rather than sentiment. Elena's presence had begun disrupting that discipline in ways he had not anticipated, and though he recognized the risk clearly, he found himself unwilling to retreat from it. That night, as Elena practiced summoning the silver markings once more, within the quiet stone chamber, she finally succeeded in holding the pattern steady across both forearms for nearly 3 full minutes, extending a faint, deliberate pulse of authority toward the guards stationed outside, without any visible fear disrupting her focus. Ines watched with quiet satisfaction. There, she said. That is strength, Elena. Not power reacting to fear, but power directed by your own will. Elena studied her glowing forearms, the intricate silver lines steady and controlled beneath her skin, and felt, for the first time since arriving at Nightshade, something close to genuine confidence settling into place, where uncertainty had lived for years. She was no longer simply the woman Damien had discarded. She was becoming, slowly and deliberately, exactly who she had always been meant to be. Damien arrived at the Black Moon Council chamber before dawn, unwilling to wait another day while his advisors debated strategy he had already decided upon in his own mind. Ellison stood near the long table, along with 2 senior generals, all of them silent, as Damien laid out his plan to reclaim Elena from Nightshade territory. A direct demand will break the truce immediately, Ellison warned. Kane will not surrender her simply because you request it, especially not now that you have shown clear interest in reclaiming her. Then we will not request, Damien said. We will offer something Nightshade cannot easily refuse. Additional border territory, reduced tribute obligations, whatever concession secures her return without triggering outright war. And if Kane refuses regardless? One of the generals asked. Damien's expression darkened. Then we will remind him precisely why Black Moon earned its reputation long before Nightshade ever challenged it. The threat hung heavily over the chamber, and though none of the advisors spoke against it openly, Ellison exchanged a brief, uneasy glance with the generals, aware that Damien's growing obsession with Elena's bloodline had begun clouding the careful, measured judgment that once defined his leadership. Serafina, listening once again from just beyond the chamber doors, felt her earlier fury solidify into something far more calculated. She understood now that appealing to Damien's reason would accomplish nothing. His focus had narrowed entirely onto reclaiming the throne's stolen advantage, and nothing Serafina said would shift that focus back toward her. If she wanted to protect her position, she would need to act independently, and quickly. That same evening, she summoned a private messenger, a young wolf named Corin who owed her a debt of loyalty from years earlier, when Serafina had quietly shielded him from punishment following a serious infraction. She met him in the shadowed stable behind the fortress, away from watching eyes. I need a message delivered to Nightshade territory, she said, discreetly. It cannot be traced back to Black Moon. Corin studied her carefully. What message? Serafina's expression hardened. A warning, she said. For Alpha Kane, Damien intends to reclaim Elena by any means necessary, including force, if diplomacy fails. If Kane wishes to protect what he currently holds, he should prepare accordingly. Corin hesitated. Why would you warn Nightshade of Black Moon's plans? Because, Serafina said coldly, the longer Elena remains in Nightshade territory, the longer she remains far away from this throne. I intend to keep it that way, regardless of what Damien decides he wants. Corin accepted the sealed message without further question, understanding, as many within Black Moon quietly did, that questioning Serafina's motives rarely ended well for those who tried. Days later, the warning reached Nightshade Castle through careful, indirect channels, delivered into Kane's hands by a trusted border scout who had intercepted Corin along a quiet forest path. Kane read the unsigned message twice, his expression growing increasingly grim. He summoned Elena to his private study that same evening, setting the message before her without preamble. Damien intends to reclaim you, he said, by force if necessary. Elena read the warning carefully, feeling a familiar cold dread settle into her chest, though this time, it arrived alongside something new, a steady undercurrent of resolve rather than helplessness. Who sent this? She asked. I do not know, Kane admitted. But the source appears reliable, and it aligns with intelligence my own scouts have gathered over the past several days. Black Moon patrols have increased noticeably along the northern border. Elena set the message down slowly. Then we prepare. Kane studied her carefully, searching her expression for any trace of fear beneath her calm resolve, and finding instead a steady determination that had not existed in the frightened woman who arrived at his gates weeks earlier. You understand what this may mean, he said carefully. If Damien moves against Nightshade to reclaim you, it will not remain a quiet political dispute. It will become open conflict between our packs. I understand, Elena said, but I will not allow him to treat me as property a second time, regardless of the consequences. Something in Kane's expression shifted, a mixture of concern and quiet admiration he did not fully attempt to hide. Then we prepare together, he said. But Elena, I need you to understand something clearly. If war comes, your safety will not be a secondary concern to me. It will be my priority above all else. Elena met his gaze steadily, aware of the weight behind his words, aware too of how far their relationship had shifted since her arrival as a frightened, discarded bride. And if my safety requires standing beside you, rather than hiding behind your protection? She asked. Kane held her gaze for a long moment before answering. Then I suspect, he said quietly, that trying to convince you otherwise would be a waste of both our time. A faint, unexpected smile crossed Elena's face, the first genuine one Kane had seen from her in days. Despite the danger gathering steadily on the horizon, despite the very real possibility of war between two powerful kingdoms, Elena felt something solidify within her in that moment, a quiet certainty that whatever came next, she would not face it as a victim of circumstance. She would face it as the woman she had only recently begun allowing herself to become. Outside the study window, storm clouds gathered heavily over the valley, echoing the tension building steadily between Black Moon and Nightshade. Neither Elena nor Kane could yet know how quickly that tension would break into open conflict, nor how significantly Elena's own awakening power would shape the outcome once it finally did. But for the first time since her arrival, Elena did not fear what waited beyond the horizon. She intended to meet it head-on. Word of rising tension between Black Moon and Nightshade spread quickly through the surrounding territories, reaching the ears of pack elders from smaller, independent territories who had watched the fragile truce with cautious hope. Among them was an elderly seer named Marisol, who had lived through 3 generations of Alpha Kings and remembered stories most younger wolves dismissed as forgotten myth. Marisol arrived at Nightshade Castle unannounced, requesting an audience with Kane through Priya, who recognized the old seer immediately and ushered her inside without hesitation. I have come because of the woman, Marisol said plainly, once seated across from Kane and Elena in his private study. The one Damien traded away. Elena stiffened slightly. What do you know of me? Marisol studied her carefully, her pale, clouded eyes moving over Elena's face with unsettling precision. I know what my instincts have told me since the night the moon marked you before your own eyes, even understood what it meant, she said. Word travels quietly among old bloodlines, child. A ripple like yours does not go unnoticed by those trained to feel it. Kane leaned forward slightly. Can you confirm what we suspect? I can do more than confirm it, Marisol said. I can show you proof beyond any doubt, if the girl is willing. Elena exchanged a brief glance with Kane before nodding. Marisol reached into a small pouch at her side and withdrew a smooth, dark stone, worn nearly flat by age and years of handling. This stone has been passed through generations of seers, she explained, used only once each generation, to confirm bloodlines suspected of moon-blessed descent. It cannot be deceived, nor manipulated. She instructed Elena to hold the stone firmly in her palm and close her eyes, focusing on calm, steady breathing, exactly as Enos had taught her. Elena obeyed, feeling the cool stone rest against her skin, unremarkable at first, until a sudden warmth spread rapidly through her palm, traveling up her arm in a wave of unmistakable energy. The stone began to glow. Not the faint, flickering silver Elena had grown accustomed to during her private training sessions, but a brilliant, steady light that filled the entire study, casting sharp shadows against the walls. Kane rose instinctively to his feet, and even Marisol, who had witnessed countless confirmations throughout her long life, drew in a sharp breath of genuine astonishment. I have performed this test dozens of times across my life, Marisol said quietly, once the light finally faded, and Elena opened her eyes, breathless and slightly disoriented. Never once has the stone responded with such intensity. What does that mean? Elena asked. Marisol's expression grew solemn. It means you are not simply descended from the moon-blessed line, she said. It means your bloodline runs closer to Queen Leora herself than any confirmed heir in recorded history. By ancient pack law, that grants you authority above every reigning alpha king in this region, including the one who so carelessly traded you away. The weight of her words settled heavily over the room. Elena felt her pulse quicken, the full scope of what Marisol described settling slowly into place within her mind. She was not simply a distant descendant of forgotten royalty. According to ancient law, she held legitimate claim to rule above both Black Moon and Nightshade combined, a truth capable of reshaping the entire political structure both kingdoms had built their power upon. This cannot remain private much longer, Marisol continued. Word of your presence has already begun spreading beyond Nightshade's borders. If Damien learns the full truth before you claim your authority publicly, he will move swiftly to eliminate the threat you represent, rather than risk losing his throne to a rightful claim he cannot legally challenge. Kane's expression hardened with determination. Then we ensure the truth reaches the wider packs on our terms, not his. A gathering, Marisol suggested. Pack elders from every surrounding territory convene twice yearly to settle disputes and confirm important matters of law. The next gathering occurs within the fortnight. If Elena's claim is presented there, before witnesses from every major pack, Damien will have no legal ground to challenge it, nor any easy path to reclaim her by force, without violating law every pack present has sworn to uphold. Elena listened carefully, feeling the enormous weight of the decision settling onto her shoulders. Claiming her heritage publicly meant abandoning any remaining possibility of a quiet private life. It meant standing before every powerful pack in the region and declaring herself heir to authority most had believed extinct for generations, authority that would immediately place her in direct opposition to the very king who had once discarded her without a second thought. If I do this, she said slowly, there is no going back from it. No, Marisol agreed gently, there is not. Elena turned to Kane, searching his expression for guidance, though she already understood that the final decision rested entirely with her. What happens to Nightshade if I claim this authority publicly? She asked. Does it place your kingdom in danger as well? Nightshade has already accepted the danger the moment we began protecting you, Kane said simply. This does not change our position. It only makes the truth impossible for Damien to ignore any longer. Elena studied the faces around her, Marisol's ancient, patient wisdom, Kane's steady resolve, and felt something settle firmly into place within her chest, a decision forming with a clarity she had not expected to arrive so quickly. Then I will claim it, she said. At the gathering, before every pack present. Marisol nodded slowly, satisfaction evident in her weathered expression. Then we have much to prepare before the fortnight arrives, she said. Claiming authority is not simply a matter of announcing a bloodline child. You will need to demonstrate command capable of proving your claim beyond doubt, in full view of skeptical witnesses who have spent their entire lives believing your bloodline extinct. Over the following days, Elena's training intensified beyond anything she had experienced previously. Ines worked with her daily, pushing her to summon and control the silver markings with increasing precision, teaching her to project calm authority, capable of commanding obedience from wolves who had never met her before, rather than relying solely on instinctive reaction. Cain, meanwhile, quietly reinforced Nightshade's borders, aware that news of Elena's intended claim might reach Damien before the gathering itself, and unwilling to leave his kingdom vulnerable during such a critical period of transition. Late one evening, as Elena rested after an exhausting training session, Cain found her sitting alone near the castle wall, staring out over the darkened valley in quiet contemplation. "You are frightened," he observed, settling beside her. "Terrified," Elena admitted honestly. "My entire life, I believed myself unwanted, insignificant enough to be traded away without consequence. Now I am preparing to stand before every powerful pack in the region and claim authority over kings who have ruled for generations." "Fear is reasonable," Cain said, echoing Inessa's earlier words. "But you are not the same woman who arrived at my gates weeks ago, uncertain of her own worth. Whatever happens at the gathering, Elena, you no longer need anyone's permission to claim the truth of who you are." Elena turned to study him carefully in the dim moonlight, aware of how significantly her feelings toward him had shifted since their earliest, cautious conversations. "Why does my success matter so much to you?" she asked quietly. "Beyond the political advantage it offers Nightshade." Cain held her gaze steadily, something unusually vulnerable crossing his normally guarded expression. "Because," he said slowly, "somewhere between guarding a hostage and protecting a secret, I stopped viewing you as either. I do not know precisely when it happened, only that it has, and I am no longer interested in pretending otherwise." The quiet honesty in his words settled warmly into Elena's chest, chasing away, if only briefly, the anxious uncertainty that had gathered there throughout the day. She did not respond immediately, allowing the moment to exist quietly between them, unspoken, but clearly understood by both. Whatever waited for her at the gathering, whatever danger Damien's inevitable reaction might bring, Elena understood now that she would not face it alone. She intended to walk into that gathering, not as a woman seeking permission to exist, but as the rightful heir to a legacy far older and far stronger than either Black Moon or Nightshade combined. And nothing, not even the king who once discarded her so easily, would stand in her way. The gathering took place on neutral ground, a wide clearing surrounded by ancient oak trees roughly halfway between Black Moon and Nightshade territory, chosen generations earlier specifically because it belonged to no single pack. Elders and representatives from a dozen surrounding territories arrived over the course of 2 days, setting up temporary camps around the clearing's edge, their conversations quiet but charged with anticipation once word spread that Nightshade intended to present a matter of significant importance. Elena stood just beyond the clearing's edge, on the morning of the gathering, dressed simply but deliberately, her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression calm, despite the nervous energy coiled tightly beneath her composed exterior. Ines stood beside her, offering final words of encouragement, while Cain remained close, his presence steady and reassuring. "Remember what we practiced," Ines said quietly. "Calm, deliberate control. Do not force the power to appear. Simply allow it to rise naturally, and it will respond exactly as it should." Elena nodded, though her heart pounded steadily against her ribs. Word had already reached Black Moon of Nightshade's intended announcement, though the exact nature remained unclear even to Damien's most reliable spies. Damien himself arrived at the gathering's edge shortly after midday, flanked by Serafina and a small contingent of guards, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious tension radiating from his posture. When Elena stepped into the clearing, walking steadily toward the center where pack elders had gathered to hear Nightshade's announcement, Damien's expression shifted sharply from confusion to alarm. "What is this?" he demanded, turning toward Cain, who stood at the clearing's opposite edge. "Patience," Cain said calmly. "You are about to understand exactly what you traded away." Elena reached the center of the clearing, and stood facing the assembled elders, aware of every eye now fixed intently upon her, aware too of Damien's furious, disbelieving stare from across the gathering. She drew a slow, steady breath, exactly as Ines had taught her, and allowed the warmth building steadily in her chest to rise without resistance. The silver markings spread rapidly across her forearms, brighter and more intricate than they had ever appeared during private training, visible even from the clearing's farthest edges. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled elders, several of them rising instinctively to their feet. Marisol stepped forward from among the gathered elders, raising her voice clearly across the clearing. "Elders of every territory present," she announced, "I have personally confirmed this woman's bloodline, using the ancient testing stone passed through generations of seers. She carries the blood of Queen Leora, last confirmed ruler of the Moon-Blessed line, believed extinct for generations." Murmurs erupted across the clearing, disbelief mixing rapidly with dawning recognition among the older elders, who remembered stories their own grandparents had once told them. Damien's expression darkened further, fury and desperation warring visibly across his features. "This is manipulation," he shouted, striding forward despite the guards attempting to hold their positions around him. "Nightshade has clearly coerced or deceived this woman into making false claims to destabilize Black Moon's authority." "I make no claims that are not entirely my own," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing, steady, despite the chaos erupting around her. "You traded me away, Damien, believing me worthless, unwanted, insignificant. You did not know, or perhaps did not care to know, exactly what you were discarding." "You are lying," Damien said, though his voice wavered slightly. Elena extended her marked forearm toward him, the silver light pulsing steadily beneath her skin. "Then explain this," she said calmly. "Explain why every wolf in this clearing feels the pull of authority radiating from a woman you claimed had no value at all." Several wolves among the gathered crowd, unable to resist the instinctive command woven into Elena's bloodline, sank slowly to their knees, despite clear confusion on their faces, unable to explain their own reaction even as it occurred. Damien's expression twisted with barely restrained rage as he watched his own guards kneel involuntarily before the woman he had traded away without a second thought. "This changes nothing," he said, though his voice carried far less conviction than before. "She was traded fairly, under agreed terms. Nightshade has no legal grounds to challenge Black Moon's authority, based on nothing more than an old bloodline test." "On the contrary," Marisol interjected firmly, "ancient pack law, sworn by every territory represented in this clearing generations ago, clearly states that confirmed Moon-Blessed heirs hold authority above any reigning Alpha King, regardless of political agreements made without full knowledge of their bloodline. Black Moon's own historical records confirm this law remains unbroken and unchallenged to this day." Damien turned sharply toward Ellison, who had accompanied him to the gathering, silently pleading for some legal argument capable of dismantling the claim now unfolding before dozens of witnesses. Ellison's grim expression offered no such reassurance. "He is correct, my king," Ellison said quietly. "The law Marisol references remains valid. If her claim is confirmed, as it clearly has been today, Black Moon has no legitimate ground to challenge her authority." The clearing fell into tense, uncertain silence as the full weight of the revelation settled over every gathered witness. Damien stood rigid, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, watching helplessly, as the woman he had discarded so carelessly stood now at the center of an authority he could not legally challenge, regardless of how desperately he wanted to. Elena studied him carefully across the clearing, feeling neither triumph nor cruelty in the moment, only a quiet, steady clarity that had been building steadily within her since her first night at Nightshade Castle. "I do not intend to seek revenge against Black Moon," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly across the silent clearing. "But I also do not intend to remain hidden, discarded, or controlled by anyone ever again. Whatever authority this bloodline grants me, I intend to use it responsibly, and I will not allow it to be dismissed simply because it proves inconvenient to a king who once believed me worthless." A ripple of quiet respect moved through the gathered elders, several nodding slowly in acknowledgement of her measured, careful words. Even Damien's own advisors exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the calm authority in Elena's tone as something far removed from the frightened, invisible woman Black Moon had once overlooked so completely. Kane stepped forward from the clearing's edge, moving to stand beside Elena, his presence steady and unwavering. Nightshade formally recognizes Elena's claim, he announced clearly, and stands ready to support her authority, in accordance with ancient law honored by every territory present. Damien's gaze shifted sharply between Elena and Kane, understanding settling grimly across his features, as he recognized the depth of alliance now standing firmly against him. "This is not finished," he said tightly, before turning and striding from the clearing, Serafina following swiftly behind him, her own expression unreadable but tense with barely restrained calculation. As Damien's retreating figure disappeared beyond the clearing's edge, the gathered elders slowly began approaching Elena, offering cautious acknowledgement, quiet questions, and, in several cases, genuine respect for the composed, deliberate manner in which she had claimed authority most had believed extinct for generations. Elena stood at the center of the clearing, surrounded by witnesses to a truth that would reshape the political landscape of every territory present, and felt, for the first time in her entire life, the full and undeniable weight of belonging exactly where she stood. She was no longer the woman Damien had traded away. She was becoming, before the eyes of every gathered pack, exactly who she had always been meant to be. Damien returned to Black Moon Fortress in a barely contained fury, storming through the halls with a coldness that sent servants scattering out of his path. Serafina followed him into his private chamber, closing the door quietly behind them, watching as he paced the length of the room, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. "You underestimated her," Serafina said carefully, testing the waters of his mood. "I underestimated my own counsel," Damien snapped. "Someone knew about her bloodline for nearly 2 decades, and said nothing, allowing me to trade away the single greatest political advantage this kingdom has ever possessed." Serafina remained silent, aware that revealing her own role in warning Nightshade of Damien's plans would only worsen his anger if discovered. Instead, she focused on redirecting his fury toward a path that served her own interests as well. "The gathering does not have to be the end of this," she said carefully. "Ancient law grants her authority, yes, but authority alone does not guarantee loyalty. If Nightshade's own pack begins doubting her claim, or if Black Moon can demonstrate that her rise threatens the stability every territory depends upon, her position could still be challenged." Damien paused his pacing, considering her words carefully. "You suggest undermining her publicly." "I suggest," Serafina said, "that a woman, untrained in true leadership, however powerful her bloodline, remains vulnerable to strategic pressure. If she falters, even once, in front of the packs now watching her closely, doubt will spread quickly." Damien's expression shifted slowly from raw fury into something colder, more calculating. "And if pressure alone does not work?" Serafina's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "Then perhaps," she said, "it becomes necessary to remind Nightshade precisely why Black Moon's military strength should not be underestimated, regardless of ancient bloodlines." Over the following days, Damien began quietly mobilizing additional forces along Black Moon's northern border, publicly framing the movement as routine defensive preparation, while privately preparing contingencies for direct confrontation, should diplomatic pressure fail to weaken Elena's newly established authority. Meanwhile, at Nightshade Castle, Elena settled slowly into the unfamiliar weight of her new position. Word of her claim spread rapidly beyond the gathering itself, reaching territories far beyond those originally present, some sending formal messages of support, others requesting further confirmation before committing publicly to acknowledging her authority. Kane worked closely alongside her during this period, guiding her through the complex political realities that came with her newly recognized status, careful never to overshadow her own growing confidence in the process. "You handled the elders well today," he said one evening, as they reviewed a stack of formal correspondence together in his study. "I nearly lost my composure twice," Elena admitted, setting aside a particularly demanding letter from a distant territory's alpha. "This is far more complicated than simply proving my bloodline. Every decision now carries weight I am not yet fully prepared to manage." "No one is ever fully prepared for authority this significant," Kane said, "not even those born directly into it. What matters is that you continue learning, adjusting, and trusting your own judgment, rather than allowing doubt to control your decisions." Elena studied him carefully, aware of how naturally he had settled into the role of steady guide throughout her transition, never once attempting to claim authority over decisions that rightfully belonged to her alone. "You could have used this situation to strengthen Nightshade's position at my expense," she said. "Instead, you have consistently supported my independence, even when it complicates your own political standing." Kane met her gaze steadily. "Because your strength does not threaten mine, Elena. It never has." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I did not help you claim this authority, because I expected something in return. I helped you because I believed, from the very beginning, that you deserved the chance to become exactly who you were always meant to be." The quiet sincerity in his words settled warmly into Elena's chest, and though the weight of her new responsibilities remained heavy, she found herself grateful, in that moment, for the steady presence beside her throughout every uncertain step of her transformation. Their growing closeness deepened further over the following weeks, though neither rushed to name it directly, both aware of the delicate political balance still forming around Elena's position. Still, small moments accumulated steadily between them, quiet conversations extending later into the evening than necessary, careful attention paid to small details the other might not have noticed offering themselves. It was during one such evening, walking together along the familiar castle wall, that Priya arrived breathlessly to deliver urgent news. "Black Moon forces have been spotted moving along the northern border," she reported. "Significant numbers, far beyond routine patrol strength." Kane's expression hardened immediately. "Damien is preparing for confrontation." Elena felt a cold certainty settle over her, the quiet peace of recent weeks giving way rapidly to the sharp awareness that Damien had never truly accepted the outcome of the gathering, regardless of ancient law, binding every territory present. "He intends to test whether authority alone is enough to stop him," she said. "Then we ensure he understands clearly that it is," Kane said, his voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation unfolding before them. Over the following days, Nightshade Castle transformed rapidly from a place of careful political transition into one of urgent, deliberate preparation. Warriors trained intensively in the courtyard, border patrols increased significantly, and Kane convened his most trusted advisors repeatedly to strategize potential responses should Damien's forces cross into Nightshade territory directly. Elena, meanwhile, continued her own preparations, working closely with Ines to refine her control over the ancient power now central to her authority, understanding clearly that whatever confrontation lay ahead, she would need every ounce of strength and control she had cultivated since her arrival at Nightshade's gates. Late one evening, as tension continued building steadily along the border, Elena found herself standing once again before Queen Leora's portrait in the hidden chamber beneath the castle, studying the painted woman's calm, commanding gaze with newfound understanding. "I do not know if I am ready for what comes next," she admitted quietly to the empty room. Behind her, Kane's voice answered softly. "No one facing a moment this significant ever feels entirely ready," he said, stepping into the chamber to stand beside her. "But readiness is not the same as capability, Elena. You have proven, repeatedly, exactly how capable you are." Elena turned to face him, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. "If Damien moves against Nightshade because of me," she said, "I will not allow innocent wolves to suffer for a conflict rooted in his refusal to accept the truth." "Then we make certain," Kane said firmly, "that whatever comes next, it ends not in needless conflict, but in Damien finally understanding exactly what he lost the day he traded you away." Outside, the moon rose full and bright over the valley, illuminating the quiet tension gathering steadily along the border between two powerful kingdoms. Elena felt the familiar warmth stirring beneath her skin, steady and controlled now rather than frightening, a quiet reminder of the strength she had claimed fully as her own. Whatever confrontation waited on the horizon, she intended to face it not as the frightened, discarded bride Damien once believed her to be, but as the rightful heir to a legacy far older and far stronger than his own reign would ever become. The northern border between Black Moon and Nightshade territory had remained quiet for generations, marked only by a modest stone bridge crossing a shallow river that neither pack had seriously contested in decades. On the morning Damien's forces finally crossed it, the quiet ended entirely. Scouts reached Nightshade Castle before dawn, breathless and urgent, reporting that Black Moon warriors had begun advancing steadily toward the border in organized formation, far exceeding the numbers required for any legitimate defensive purpose. Kane received the report in his study, Elena standing beside him, both fully dressed and prepared despite the early hour. "He is finally moving," Kane said grimly. "How long until they reach the border itself?" Elena asked. "Perhaps 2 hours, based on their current pace," Priya reported, having arrived alongside the scouts. "Our own warriors are already mobilizing along our side of the river." Elena felt her pulse quicken, though the fear coursing through her chest arrived alongside a steady undercurrent of resolve she had not possessed during her earliest days at Nightshade. She was no longer the frightened, uncertain woman who had once been traded away without a voice in her own fate. Whatever Damien intended by this show of force, she did not intend to hide behind Nightshade's walls, while others faced the consequences of his refusal to accept the truth. "I will go to the border myself," she said. Kane turned sharply toward her. "Elena, that is precisely the confrontation Damien may be hoping to provoke." "Then let him have his confrontation," Elena said steadily. "But let it be on terms I choose, not terms forced upon me by his desperation to reclaim something he never truly understood the value of." Kane studied her carefully, recognizing the same quiet determination that had carried her through every challenge since her arrival. And though every protective instinct urged him to keep her safely within the castle walls, he understood clearly that Elena's authority, and her right to exercise it fully, belonged to her alone. "Then we go together," he said finally. Within the hour, Nightshade's warriors assembled along the riverbank, disciplined and steady, despite the tension radiating visibly through their ranks. Elena rode beside Kane at the formation's front, her expression calm despite the pounding of her heart, watching as Black Moon's forces came into view on the opposite bank, led personally by Damien himself, flanked by Serafina and a significant contingent of heavily armed warriors. The two forces stopped roughly 50 paces apart on either side of the narrow stone bridge, tension crackling visibly in the cool morning air. "Damien," Kane called across the distance, his voice carrying clearly. "This crossing violates the truce sworn by both our kingdoms." "The truce was built on deception," Damien called back, his voice tight with barely restrained fury. "I do not recognize an agreement made under false pretenses." "The deception was your own counsel's, not mine," Elena said, urging her horse forward slightly, positioning herself clearly at Kane's side. "You traded me away believing me worthless. That I proved otherwise does not invalidate the agreement you made freely, with full knowledge of its terms." Damien's gaze locked onto her, a mixture of fury and something almost desperate flickering behind his eyes. "You do not understand what you have become, Elena," he said. "A claim like yours does not simply grant authority. It destabilizes generations of careful political balance between every territory in this region. Pacts will fracture. Wars will erupt over who legitimately holds power. I am trying to prevent exactly that outcome." "You are trying to reclaim what you lost," Elena said sharply, and dressing it in the language of protecting stability. A tense silence stretched between the two opposing forces, broken only by the quiet rush of the river beneath the stone bridge. Serafina, watching closely from Damien's side, studied Elena with an unreadable expression, calculating something Elena could not quite decipher. "I am prepared to offer a compromise," Damien said finally, his tone shifting slightly toward careful negotiation. "Return to Black Moon voluntarily, and I will formally recognize your authority alongside my own. A shared rule, capable of stabilizing every territory, currently uncertain of where true power now resides." "You mean absorb my authority into your own," Elena said, seeing through the offer immediately. "A shared throne in name only, while true power remains firmly in your hands." Damien's jaw tightened slightly, confirming her suspicion without a single word. "I will not return to Black Moon," Elena said firmly, her voice carrying clearly across the tense standoff. "Not as your bride, not as your co-ruler, not as anything other than exactly what I already am. If you wish to avoid war, Damien, the solution is simple. Withdraw your forces, and accept the truth every territory present at the gathering has already acknowledged." Damien's expression darkened further, and for a long, tense moment, Elena feared her refusal might finally push him toward the violent confrontation both sides had been carefully circling. Then, unexpectedly, Serafina urged her horse forward slightly, drawing Damien's sharp attention. "My king," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard by those nearby. "Before this escalates further, there is something you should know." Damien turned toward her, confusion crossing his features. "What are you talking about?" Serafina hesitated only briefly before continuing, her voice steady despite the obvious risk in what she was about to reveal. "I sent the warning to Nightshade," she said, "weeks ago, informing them of your intentions to reclaim Elena, by force if necessary." A ripple of shock moved through both gathered forces, Damien's expression twisting sharply from confusion into betrayal. "Why would you do that?" he demanded. "Because," Serafina said, her composure finally cracking slightly, "I understood, long before you did, exactly how dangerous your obsession with reclaiming her had become, not for political reasons, but because some part of you has never fully released whatever connection once existed between you and her. I chose to protect my own position, rather than watch you march this kingdom into a war neither of us can afford, all because you refuse to accept that she is no longer yours to reclaim." Damien stared at Serafina, stunned into rare silence, the weight of her admission settling heavily over the tense standoff. Elena watched the exchange carefully, feeling an unexpected wave of clarity settle over her own understanding of the situation. Damien's determination to reclaim her, she realized, had never truly been about political advantage alone. Some deeply buried, unresolved guilt over discarding her so carelessly had clearly festered beneath his calculated ambition, driving him toward a confrontation that risked everything both kingdoms had worked to stabilize. "Damien," Elena said quietly, drawing his attention back toward her. "Whatever guilt you carry over what you did to me, war will not resolve it. It will only compound the damage far beyond what either of us can repair." Damien's expression shifted slowly, the raw fury gradually giving way to something closer to exhausted resignation. He glanced briefly at his own assembled warriors, then across the river, toward Nightshade's equally prepared forces, seeming, for the first time, to fully register the catastrophic consequences a single command from him might unleash. "Withdraw," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm, directed toward his own generals. We returned to Black Moon. A visible wave of relief moved through both gathered forces, as Black Moon's warriors began slowly retreating from the riverbank, tension easing gradually from the standoff that had nearly erupted into open conflict. Before turning to follow his retreating forces, Damien looked once more toward Elena, something unreadable, but no longer entirely hostile crossing his expression. "This is not forgiveness," he said quietly, "but it is, perhaps, acceptance of a truth I should have recognized far sooner." Elena said nothing in response, watching silently as Damien turned his horse and rode back toward Black Moon territory, Serafina following closely behind him, her own expression carrying the weight of consequences she now understood she would need to face upon their return. As the last of Black Moon's forces disappeared beyond the tree line, Kane turned toward Elena, quiet relief evident in his gray eyes. "You handled that with more composure than I managed to maintain internally," he admitted. Elena allowed herself a slow, steadying breath, the tension of the standoff finally beginning to ease from her shoulders. "I did not want war fought over my own reclaimed identity," she said. "Too many wolves on both sides would have suffered for a conflict, rooted entirely in one king's inability to accept the consequences of his own decisions." Kane studied her carefully, admiration evident in his steady gaze. "You handled it as a true leader would," he said quietly. "Not through force alone, but through clarity and restraint." As Nightshade's warriors began the slow journey back toward the castle, Elena rode beside Kane in thoughtful silence, aware that whatever conflict had nearly erupted along the border that morning, the true resolution of her story was only just beginning to take shape. She had survived Damien's attempt to reclaim her. Now, she needed to decide exactly what kind of ruler she intended to become. In the weeks following the standoff at the northern border, word spread rapidly across every territory that had witnessed or heard of the near confrontation between Black Moon and Nightshade. Elena's calm, deliberate handling of the crisis, refusing violence while firmly maintaining her claimed authority, earned her a level of respect that no amount of political maneuvering alone could have secured. Formal messages of recognition arrived steadily from surrounding territories, elders and alpha leaders alike, acknowledging her authority in accordance with ancient law. Some requesting audiences to discuss how her claimed position might reshape existing agreements between packs, long accustomed to operating solely under individual alpha kings. Elena spent long hours reviewing these requests, alongside Cain and his trusted advisors, slowly building an understanding of exactly what her new position required, not merely as a symbolic figure representing a forgotten bloodline, but as a genuine leader, capable of guiding meaningful decisions, affecting every territory, now watching her closely. "You have handled this transition remarkably well," Marisol observed during one of her periodic visits to Nightshade Castle, watching Elena review correspondence with careful, practiced focus. "Many who inherit sudden authority struggle far longer to find their footing." "I had considerable help," Elena said, glancing briefly toward Cain, who sat nearby reviewing separate reports. "Help, yes," Marisol agreed. "But the composure, the judgment, the willingness to choose restraint over vengeance when confronting Damien, those qualities belong entirely to you." Elena absorbed the words quietly, aware of how far she had traveled from the frightened, uncertain woman who had once believed herself entirely without value. The journey had not been easy, nor was it entirely finished, but she recognized now, with growing confidence, exactly how much strength she had always carried within herself, long before Nightshade, or Queen Leora's forgotten bloodline, had ever entered her understanding of who she truly was. As formal recognition of her authority solidified across the surrounding territories, a natural question began arising among Nightshade's own council regarding the practical structure her rule would take. Ancient law granted her authority above individual alpha kings, but the specifics of how that authority would function, alongside existing pack structures, remained, in many ways, still being defined through the very precedent Elena herself was establishing. During a formal council meeting, convened specifically to address the matter, one of Nightshade's senior advisors raised the question directly. "Alpha Cain has supported your claim from its earliest confirmation," the advisor said carefully. "Many among the surrounding territories have begun assuming a formal alliance, perhaps even a shared rule, between Nightshade and your own established authority. Might I ask whether such an arrangement reflects your own intentions?" Elena glanced toward Cain, who remained carefully neutral, allowing the decision to remain entirely hers to voice. "Nightshade has been the one kingdom willing to protect and support me, without demanding anything in return," Elena said finally. "I do not intend to rule from a distance, disconnected from the territory that gave me the safety and guidance necessary to become who I am today." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "If Alpha Cain is willing, I would consider formalizing a shared rule between us, not merely as political convenience, but as genuine partnership." A quiet murmur of approval moved through the assembled council, and Cain, meeting Elena's gaze directly across the table, offered a small, genuine smile that carried far more warmth than any formal political agreement required. "I would welcome that," he said simply. The formal ceremony took place several weeks later, in the same wide clearing where Elena had first claimed her authority, before the assembled elders. This time, representatives from nearly every territory in the region gathered, along with Nightshade's entire pack, to witness the formal recognition of Elena's rule, alongside Cain's continued leadership of Nightshade itself. Elena stood at the center of the clearing, dressed simply but with quiet dignity, the silver markings of her bloodline visible along her forearms, no longer something she needed to summon deliberately, but a steady, natural extension of who she had become. Cain stood beside her, his expression carrying none of the guarded distance that had once defined their earliest interactions. Marisol presided over the ceremony, her ancient voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "By ancient law, confirmed and witnessed, Elena of the Moon-blessed line stands recognized as rightful authority, above the reigning kings of every territory represented here today," she announced. "Her rule shall be honored, her authority upheld, and her legacy remembered, as the restoration of a bloodline, once believed lost to history." A wave of quiet acknowledgement moved through the crowd, wolves from a dozen territories bowing respectfully, some out of genuine reverence, others out of careful political recognition of the shifting power now firmly established. As the formal ceremony concluded, Elena turned to look out over the gathered crowd, remembering, with quiet clarity, the frightened, uncertain woman, who had once stood in a similar clearing, believing herself entirely without value, discarded by a king who never understood what he was giving away. That woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had learned, through difficult, deliberate growth, exactly what it meant to claim her own worth, her own authority, and her own future, regardless of how thoroughly others had once tried to convince her she deserved none of it. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued within Nightshade Castle, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Cain, along the familiar stretch of castle wall that had become, over the months, distinctly theirs. "Word has already reached Black Moon of today's ceremony," Cain said quietly, watching the distant horizon. "I imagine it has," Elena said, "though I no longer feel the need to concern myself with Damien's reaction to it." Cain turned to study her carefully. "How does it feel?" he asked, finally claiming the life that was always meant to be yours. Elena considered the question seriously before answering, aware of how far she had traveled since the cold, frightened carriage ride that had first delivered her into Nightshade's unfamiliar territory. "It feels," she said slowly, "like finally exhaling a breath I did not realize I had been holding my entire life." Cain reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining gently with hers, a simple gesture that carried far more meaning than any formal declaration could have offered. "Then let us build something worth exhaling for," he said quietly. "Together." As the moon rose full and bright over the valley below, illuminating the quiet strength of the kingdom Elena now called home, she allowed herself, finally, to imagine a future built not on fear, discarded value, or forced obedience, but on genuine partnership, hard-earned authority, and a legacy she intended to carry forward with the same quiet resolve that had brought her this far. Damien had traded her away, believing her worthless. He never imagined she would return, not as a discarded bride reclaimed, but as the rightful queen standing firmly beside the very enemy he once believed he had outmaneuvered. And as Nightshade's celebration continued quietly into the night, Elena understood, with complete and unwavering certainty, that whatever challenges still waited on the horizon, she would face them, exactly as she had faced everything since that cold winter morning in Black Moon's courtyard. Not as someone waiting to be given a place in the world, but as someone who had finally claimed it entirely on her own terms.